Okay, so we're on my 5 CJS maxims. And number 2 is, and this is really self-evident, hopefully to all of you, even at your age, that in this country there seems to be 2 systems of justice, one for the rich and powerful and one for everybody else, the non-rich and non-powerful. So if you look at presidential pardons that were given by Bill Clinton and given by Trump, you will see that political friends get rewarded, and those people are normally rich and powerful. Rod Blagojevich, perfect example. He was a Democrat. He caught 14 years from a federal judge in Chicago a number of years ago for corruption, trying to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat for benefit to himself, demanding a $50,000 campaign contribution from the president of a children's hospital in exchange for the state paying millions of dollars in bills that were legitimately owed by the state to the children's hospital. That's what this guy did to deserve from Judge Zagel, who's a person I saw lecture in the year 2000 on mental health law. He's a wonderful man. Gave him the 14 years. Well, as you probably know, in, I believe, February this year, Donald Trump, who had him on his unwatchable TV show, The Apprentice, was friendly with this guy, even though they're opposite viewpoints and opposite political parties, and he gave him a commutation of his sentence. That means that he got a jail-free card right away. Now I see that Rod, a total lightweight, is now supporting Trump in the presidential election. So Senator Harris is exactly right when she says that there are 2 systems of justice. What these politicians fail to tell us is what the hell they're going to do about it. The third one is that human beings, in my experience, act in accordance with their histories, meaning their prior behavior, and the forces that shape them. So let me give you a typical example. Let's say I was prosecuting a case, which I did from 1989 to 2013 when I was able to retire, and it's a straight burglary of a garage case. Now, the defendant is eligible for probation. It's a nonviolent offense. Let's just assume also that the burglary of a garage was caught inside and nothing was taken. Or that same person is eligible, according to these politicians in Springfield, for 3 to 7 years in prison. Well, I think our society is coming around to the libertarian view that I know I've held for many, many years, that we do not, in general, need to put nonviolent offenders in a cage. Now, there are certain exceptions to that. For political criminals, I believe an example has to be set for these politicians. For Bernie Madoff, who stole billions of dollars from innocent people, big thieves that absolutely need to be set an example of and need to go away. But I don't believe that anybody should ever be putting people away for possession of marijuana, smoking marijuana, especially now that so many states have allowed marijuana sales to proceed. Of course, these states make a big profit on it. I remember during the lockdown in March, Governor Pritzker said that the marijuana dispensaries were essential businesses. I question that, of course, greatly, but I understand what he's saying is because they need the money. The state's broke. That's number 3. Number 4 is probably the most important, and that is a fair process in reality, a real fair process that is not biased toward either side, that does afford an accused, no matter who they are, a true presumption of innocence, yields a fair result. And I gave you the Laquan McDonald example of the police officer who many people thought would not be convicted of anything. The jurors begged to differ, and for the first time in decades, a police officer in the city of Chicago was found guilty of any form of murder. So the community has to see, by reading about the case or seeing it on court TV live, they have to see that the judge is not biased and competent. They have to see that even the prosecutor is non-biased and competent, because you may not know this, but it is the ethical duty and thus the law that every prosecutor in this country, and I was one for 24 years, has a duty not to seek convictions but to do justice. That means dismissing cases that are weak, that are the state knows they cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high burden of proof. And so whenever the killer of Laquan McDonald was sent away to the penitentiary, there was no outrage by either side. That means to me that all the citizens of Chicago did believe that that officer was treated fairly and that he did deserve to go to prison for what they themselves saw happen on videotape. Now, In that case, Rahm Emanuel, was going to run for office again. I forget which year he was up. And he hid the tape and would not release that tape for many months until it got to be so bad when it was finally released that he was such a bad politician that he chose not to run again as the incumbent powerful mayor of the city of Chicago. And my last maxim, and this is where you do come in, is the system is only good as the people in it. So if you're in CJS or you want to go to law school or you want to be a court psychologist and you want to go into the profession, really your training and your part of the profession starts now when you're in training, and I hope to impress that upon you. That means that my training in criminal justice started when I was 18. Now, my personal view of the keys to your success in your education and thus your career and your life are maybe things you haven't thought about. One is passion. If you do not passionately want to learn about this material, maybe you're not cut out for it and you ought to do something else. Immersion into the material. If CJS is your intended profession and is your major, then you should want to independently read books about cases, or there's very many books I would recommend to you about true crime. Other things I think are key to your success in this class and at this school at SIUE would be single-mindedness and energy. I like people who have a motor. That's not my term, that's Adam Carolla, the comics term. Now, he comes up in this class because you can listen to an hour of his podcast called Reasonable Doubt, the very, very good lawyer, very experienced lawyer, who's represented people in some of the most famous cases in the last 40 years. His name is Mark Garagos, and I offer that for extra credit. We'll discuss that when we discuss the syllabus. So those are the 4 or 5 things that I think are key to your intended success in life, and you either really have them or you don't. I hope that you all have them. Let's talk about the natural rights of human beings. And these are rights that you have as free, autonomous humans walking the earth, as sentient, which means conscious human beings. And these rights, I would submit to you, are not granted to you by politicians, many of whom are very distasteful human beings, and whose morals and ethics are vastly inferior to yours. So these rights are granted to you on this planet, on an Earth that's hurling through space around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour and spinning at 24,000 miles an hour, hence 24 hours in a day. So why don't we feel it? Why don't we feel hurling through space at 67,000 miles an hour and spinning at 24? Well, it's because we're grounded. In this case, the physical reason is by gravity. So one goal I have for you all here is to help ground you and ground you in what's real. That's why we'll use many varieties of media to present to you normally the third hour of a 3-hour lecture per week posted by Friday. And that would include books I'll recommend to you that you don't have to read, but books that maybe would make you a better person by reading. Articles, my published writings, some of which would be up on the blackboard. A lecture on free expression I gave a few years ago to lawyers for their continuing legal education. I'll recommend to you great, outstanding podcasts, and there are many of them out there. Video clips and movies to help ground you and to enrich your lives. And if I think some other communicator can present in a better, more interesting way this material better than a straight lecture by me or anybody else, then I'll present that to you. Because I figure, why not the best way to learn? And that is why you're going to have an hour and 39 minutes for the parts 2 and 3 of this class tonight. The first episode of the documentary by Ken Burns and his brother Eric Burns called The Civil War. And it's why I've also posted from last semester a podcast interview by the brilliant neuroscientist Sam Harris, this person on the left, with a security expert who is the security director for the Amazon owner Bezos, and for half of Hollywood, Gavin DeBecker. And the purpose of that is that it's called The Gift of Fear. There's also a book written about 20 years ago by Gavin. And here's what the theme of the podcast with Sam is, like 2 hours long. And it is that in general, if you sense something is wrong in your surroundings, it's your evolutionarily developed intuition telling you to watch out for yourself. And he will talk about things you can do to protect yourself. So whenever in the course of these next 15 weeks, and the final is the 16th, I want you to look forward to clicking on the Blackboard for Ryan's class to see what I'm up to see what you're going to learn, and hopefully what you will enjoy learning. So let's talk about now what your natural rights as independent, sentient, conscious human beings are walking the earth. And we'll talk about which ones are recognized by the law in the United States, by the bureaucracy, which really runs things, by the president, by the Supreme Court, and by other appellate courts. So in terms of natural rights of human beings, we're going to ask what are they, and which ones are recognized by American law and thus the Constitution and its amendments, or by court decisions. And here are some of the rights that I believe are or should be natural to all human beings, no matter where we are. Imagine you, thousands and thousands of years ago, are a member of a tribe of hunter-gatherers. These people were just trying to survive. It might be you're a bushman, or you're the wife of a bushman, or daughter of a bushman in either Africa or Europe, where typically the hunter-gatherer society had developed. And you have two goals in mind. First, well, really three. You want to eat that day, thus you want to survive, and you have an evolutionary developed desire to reproduce so that there are other humans to take your place. So wouldn't our ancestor hunter-gatherers think that they have every right, without even a formal government, to, number one, be free? That is recognized in the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, when the Congress and the state legislature passed in, I believe, 1866, right after the Civil War, one of the Civil War amendments, that you cannot be deprived of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And the thumbnail sketch definition of due process is easy. It is that process which is due you in the justice system. That process which is due you in the justice system, that's an easy way to understand what due process or basic rights are. So what does freedom really mean? Well, unfortunately, since the coronavirus pandemic came to America, the first case was in Washington State, where my daughter lives, in January of this year. That was the first death, I believe, of a female resident of a nursing home there. I think that with the impingements on our freedoms, and many people believe that these lockdowns were absolutely necessary to flatten the curve and thus not overwhelm the hospitals and not save lives. But still, no one can deny, no fair-minded person can deny, that our freedom to associate, freedom to earn a living, has been shut down in order to save lives, pursuant to what these justices call, in the Supreme Court, the police power. If you read the entire Constitution and amendments, the words police power are contained nowhere in there. But the Supreme Court in Marbury versus Madison took it upon themselves in the early 1800s to decide that the Supreme Court and the federal courts, would be the court of last resort to decide what the Constitution means. Not what the Senate thinks, not what the Congress thinks, not what POTUS thinks. They decided that they're the ones to interpret the Constitution. They did interpret the Constitution for years, that in a crisis, the government has a police power to try to save lives and to keep order. So what does freedom really mean? Now, an entire class or years of a class could be taught about what liberty and freedom mean. But I would posit to you this definition, and that's the right to do what you want so long as you don't hurt anybody else. And that really should be the foundation of American law. Number two natural right, I believe, is the freedom to travel and move. You think the hunter-gatherer tribe needed permission from a larger government to decide to move, let's say, south for the winter if they're in Europe, or maybe north for the winter if they're in northern Africa? The right to travel is in the Constitution, although not explicitly. It's been interpreted by SCOTUS for years to be included in the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment. In the 14th Amendment, two parts to it chiefly are the Due Process Clause, as applies to all forms of government, including the states, and the Equal Protection of the Laws Clause that's in the 14th Amendment. More on that later. So the first two natural rights are an overarching, number one, right to be free, and number two, to freely travel and move. Along those lines, number three is you should have the right to freely associate with whom you want to. That has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to be contained in the First Amendment, 14th Amendment, and they call it the free association concept. Aligned with that, number four is you should have the natural right to have the freedom to love who you choose to love. So finally, in the last 15 or 20 years, after ruling the opposite way on gay rights, the Supreme Court, because of a libertarian centrist on the court, that's Justice Anthony Kennedy, who retired a couple of years ago, and then Kavanaugh took his place in, I believe, 2019. He was the swing vote. There were 4 conservatives against gay marriage and the right to have the government not stop you from marrying if you're gay, the right to get a marriage license. And there were 4 justices, progressive justices on the left, who were for gay rights. So Kennedy was a Reagan appointee, and unfortunately that does matter, despite what Chief Justice Roberts says. There are no Obama judges, there's no Trump judges. Well, to be a federal judge, I must tell you, and I have friends who are on the federal bench or who are eligible now and have been approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee to be a new federal judge. Politics, unfortunately, is necessary to have the pull to get to be a federal judge. And these 2 people I'm speaking of are highly qualified to be there. So in the last 15 or 20 years, the Supreme Court has recognized the right to gay marriage. Lately, they have ruled in the last few months the right of trans and gay people to sue for sex discrimination, that they interpreted that federal law that allows people to sue for gender discrimination to include them. And we're going to take a break now, and then in the next few minutes I'll talk about Loving versus West Virginia.